Hello and welcome back to the Innovate Eco podcast. I'm your host, Rob Rugglesworth, and this is the podcast where I interview planet positive founders who are taking direct action, building businesses to tackle the environmental crisis. In today's episode, I'm speaking to Elise Van Middelem, who is the founder of the company SUGi. Now, SUGi are specialists in building what they call pocket forests using the Miyawaki Method. And we get into that in this episode a bit more, but essentially what it means is planting trees and shrubs really close together in small urban areas, and this method, using the right soil treatment and stuff like that, means they grow really quickly and has a really big impact, which is what we need, obviously, really quickly. So we talk about that loads in this episode, about how it works, about that method in more detail, and yeah, the impact that SUGi are having. They're already in various countries around the world. They've got multiple forests in London, in the UK, and elsewhere, in New York now as well, and they're having a really big impact. So yeah, we get into that in loads of detail in this episode. So without further ado, here is my chat with Elise. I've been reading about your background. You're in, if I'm right, it was in brand strategy and art, and I find it really interesting when people with these different backgrounds to just an ecology background or an nature restoration background come in and bring these different perspectives. So I thought that was one of the things that really intrigued me and drew me to having a conversation with you. And I thought that would be a good place to start. Like, how did you go from that background in working in that area for so long and decide to start on this new journey with SUGi, and when did that happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's a good question. I think in the end, Rob, it's like many of us today, right, feel concerned and overwhelmed by the scale of the ecological problem. And for me, the transition was sort of a really hard one in the sense that I still love doing what I did then, these building out these creative brand strategies and working with artists, around the world. But I just realized that I wanted to do something positively impactful, and I wanted to invest in nature. And as I was looking for a place where I could literally like track and stay connected to my investment, I couldn't find it.
Mm.
And so I set out to build it. And it was really like I was still very much working on projects in the art world, but I thought, you know what, I'll just start with one pocket forest. And I didn't have much of a plan. I had a name. And then so it started.
So in terms of, let's start from with the context, I guess, and tiny forests and that what are tiny forests? How did you come across the idea? Was it something that you'd come across before? Um, where did you stumble across the idea, and what potential did you see in it, I guess?
Yeah, right. And so as I said to you, as I really was looking for this place where I could find something where I could celebrate wild nature and also like connect to communities, um, I I sort of like stumbled upon learning about the Miyawaki method.
Mm.
And what attracted me immediately in that method and in that way of planting, because you might hear about tiny forests, micro forests, mini forests, we call them pocket forests. They're all based upon the same method of planting, the Miyawaki method. Dr. Akira Miyawaki, pioneered that method over 50 years ago in Japan. And the idea is, and here, I am not a scientist, but what attracted me is that on minimal space, you could create maximum diversity. You basically mimic what was once there. And so it's not a shortcut. It's not a just one tree fits all. It's wherever you are in the world, you will search for the right species and plant them densely and really create these micro ecosystems. So this idea of like, unused space, abandoned space, deep paving, rewilding, that really attracted me, and building biodiversity and creating climate resilience and connecting people to nature. So these are really the three pillars of SUGi.
Amazing. So digging a little bit more, you say you're not a scientist, but I bet you know it inside out now. The actual method itself, you said, originated in Japan. What are the core concepts of it? What makes it special? What makes it different to other? You hear about tree planting going on all over the world and tree planting schemes and different things, but what makes this method different? What are the kind of core components to go out and create one of these pocket forests, I guess?
Yes, and so the first and foremost thing is that they can be planted right where we live and work,
Right.
and we really beckon universal participation. But there are scientific steps to it. So Dr. Akira Miyawaki, was absolutely like a scientist and a botanist. And the idea really is it starts with the soil. Our soils today are depleted. We must do a soil survey, really understand what kind of natural ingredients we bring back to the soil. From there, we do a potential natural vegetation report, PNV. So we really survey what was once there. And for us, really, we don't look at, oh, the temperature is rising, we need to plant different species. No, because when you plant them together in these 4 layers, that's a very important point. You really create that resilience. So as they communicate underground, they do compete for light, and that's why we have this fast growth. So you mulch heavily, create that ecosystem. And then no maintenance is the best maintenance. Over 2 to 3 years, you have a self-sustaining forest.
That point around it being a bit more hands off and the no maintenance side is what really interests me. And when I was learning about this method and reading more about it, because so much of what gets criticism in the wider tree planting sphere, I guess, is often it can be high rates of failure or monocultures, and it feels like this method is designed principally to kind of get around some of those limitations by really looking in depth at the science, bringing in different idea, like bringing in the right materials at the start and getting the conditions right, I guess, from day one to, as you say, in order to set it up to be self-sustaining pretty
That's
much
right,
straight
and
away.
that's also what they elaborate. Really, when I speak to people, we always say we don't plant trees. We create microbiomes. You look at them as a whole, and that's why we can't. It was really in the beginning also challenging. You go to someone and you say, look, if you want to work with SUGi, you will have to adopt a pocket forest. They're like, no, we want to plant trees, and I'm like, that doesn't work, because when we plant the pocket forest as one, it needs to be done at the same time so they can grow together as an ecosystem. So yeah, that no maintenance, but also like really depends, right? The soil must be really fluffy and healthy, and then the better you prepare, the better the result is. And also like what really enhances the result is the communities, the ones that live and work with the wild. That is where we see the biggest success in our pocket forest.
So let's dive into that subject a bit more, the benefits of pocket forests, what they can bring from not only an environmental point of view and a biodiversity point of view, but it feels like to me that social benefit is core, and bringing the community into the projects is really key. Be great if you could talk a little bit about the benefits throughout, because there are many, and in particular that social side, and maybe if you've got some particular projects that you've worked on that you're particularly proud of the story to bring it to life.
Careful, I can be gone for 2 hours now.
Oh, please go for it. Yeah, please.
No. But okay, so going to the first point, I mean, this was really like one of the guiding principles of building SUGi, right? Like for me, it needed to be not only about the environmental aspect. Yes, we do create the impact, but it had to have that human story. It had to have the storytelling with it. So SUGi in one place, you have both sides, and that was a very important thing. I mean, and that's also why I set it out, like to be able to follow your investment over time. So today we document all these phases, the growth of the forest, the environmental impact. We do heat maps on forest. We look at the biodiversity and, growth rates. But the human aspect, that is actually sometimes the most astounding. And in the beginning, we couldn't really know that, because look, when we've been now working big 4 years, there was a lockdown. So The same is big for years. We have 198 pocket forests planted. And the thing is that in the beginning, you couldn't really see that. It needed this time. It needed 3 years minimum to really see the growth and what they do within the communities. And so our last impact report, the 2023 one, that we just put out, is really focused around that. You know, it's, yes, certainly there are the KPIs and the environmental, but we wanted to highlight the human stories behind it, the people that really live and work in wild, that are really connected to the forest and how they participate in it. And I'll give you a few examples right now. But before going in that, like if you look at the SUGi pocket forest, we always say, you know, yes, there's like 4 environmental pillars. You know, there's the forget it. There are 4 impact pillars. There's the environmental one, you know, there's the economic one, there's the social one, but then there's also the inspiration one. We have people that come and draw in the forest. We have, you know, film screenings that are done in the forest. So there's a lot happening also inspirationally. But okay, a few examples for Limbe, Cameroon. Okay, we're out of a city here. We're more in a rural village. Limbe reached out to me in 2019, and she says, "Look, I'd love to rewild the water catchments." Well, the water catchments, you know, they wash their cars, they clean their bikes, they take the drinking water, and they were completely depleted due to encroachment on the sites. We create a really small pocket forest from 200 square meters to 1,000 square meters. Well, today the water tables have risen to that extent that they installed solar panels to pump the water to the villages. So, you know, this has become a place where also now women come together and they harvest the castor seeds. They're making castor oil. So there is this whole community aspect that comes with the forest. We've got 4 incredibly successful phases there. In the US, there's a whole different story to it. Our first pocket forest there, we planted in a correctional facility. It's called the Healing Forest. And in the US, we work a lot with that tribal knowledge, you know, the original stewards of the land. And what we did there with the Healing Forest, the idea was really to create a forest that heals the body, the mind, and the spirit. Sure, I mean, the land was dust. I mean, actually, the soil was so acidic, you know, Ethan really brought back natural ingredients in it. And today the forest is 3 years. It's self-sustaining. It's absolutely, I have to say, magnificent, because Mary Lee, who's the gatherer from the tribal community, said that today they're gathering over 28 foods out of the forest.
Wow.
So they do their ceremonies there. They create really like their typical teas that they make, you know. So from elderberry, snowberry, gooseberry, they have, you know, rosehip. They have so many types of their ancestral fruits and species that are back now. And so this I really have to say, with the beauty with the method is like, okay, you know, in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, we're working in these incredibly low-income neighborhoods with our local team there. Atlantic rainforest. I mean, how much is left? 6-7%.
Yeah.
And so to create these pockets in the schools of Atlantic rainforest, the children themselves, I mean, they learn again about the species, about what it was to have that forest. We even have species today that don't survive in the heat of a city, but they survive in the pocket forest because they have their ecosystem again. And actually, it's called the god of the tree. It's I can't say the name. It's a type of pine. It's Aurarico. Anyways, nice. So, but it's really astounding, and I can keep going around the world. You know, we plant in hospitals in Chile a lot. So then patients come and sit with the forest. They want to just listen to the songbird. It calms them down. It gives them hope. And you know, I can keep, you know, going.
I mean, that we'll come on to that in a bit. This the idea of it being a truly global solution that can connect, because I think that's a truly fascinating element of this. But just tapping a bit more into that social element that it brings, it's so powerful. And often we've got this issue of a disconnect with nature a lot of the times in cities, and this is where I can see it being a really powerful a reconnector uh, with nature. I mean, it's unfortunate that so many, particularly in the UK here where I am, and you think of city centres in Manchester where I live, and the amount of vegetation is depleted to the point where it just feels like the word forest feels like a distant thing for imagine for a child growing up now in within the city within a few tens of kilometers of the city center they grow up, and the idea of a forest is something that's far away and distant and disconnected and so bringing the ability to bring that connection back to something that you can see visually right in front of you, it must have so many benefits. The one thing I was thinking about, and I think you mentioned this in one of your blog posts or videos, was around showing just how long these, although it's fast with this method, it's faster than it would be to plant a
Mm.
normal forest, giving the appreciation back to, it's not as easy as if we chop some trees down over there, we can just plant them, it'll all be fine. Bringing back that appreciation of
Mm.
the time it takes to reestablish a forest, I think is a really powerful potential connector as well.
Well, I mean, you touch upon a very important point for us, and that is really one of the key reasons for SUGi being, right? It's like, why plant far away? We need to plant right in our cities where we live and work, and for children to reconnect in that way. If you think of it, we've planted in over 110 schools now, so
Wow.
52,000 youth have been involved in the planting, and for them firsthand to learn about the species, but also to see restoration firsthand. Like you said, it's so much more complex, right, for a forest to take shape. And even though we speak, the method, allows for quicker growth, it still takes about 20 years to have that canopy structure in our temperate climate. Yeah, absolutely.
So in a way, yeah, and it brings that home, but then also you've got you then the connection and that growing with the forest as well. I think that's going to be, you must have already seen this from some of your early projects, I'm sure, the that connection throughout, and then eventually in 20, 30 years, if people are still living in that area, they had a part to play in that planting. It feels like it's part of them, part of the community, I guess.
That's absolutely right, and we see this already in certain in certain neighborhoods, but we don't have to go that far. Like if you think of it in London, right? London alone, we now have about 23 pocket forests planted, and that's in 3 years, so quite remarkable in the
Mm,
sense that Chelsea and Kensington, Newham, and then Barking and Dagenham. These are the councils that we work most with. And if you think of it in Pond Street, like imagine this kind of biodiversity desert between, these big plane trees. There's nothing going on there, right? In the soil, like it's sort of dead.
mm,
Um, we brought back that kind of idea of the wild and the songbird by planting a pocket forest in between the plane trees. So basically 600 trees. We took away, we designed it so there's like no canopy that will come and that it can thrive within the shade. Well,
mm,
in 2 years, this is now self-sustaining. And the other day I went into the forest because I wanted to measure something or look at, I can't remember. Anyways, the neighbor came running out and she said, this is the cutest thing. She said, don't pull out my trees. And I'm like, like, no, I'm measuring. But so you see, like, you don't have to go far. People
mm.
reconnect very quickly to something that is so maybe today alienated, but was so much part of us, nature, and is still part of us. You just need to sort of awaken it. And so yeah. But
Yeah.
okay, this brings us to a bigger conversation, right? Is that idea of like biodiversity and climate change,
Mm.
have been pulled apart, but they're 100% interwoven. And, it's only by reconnecting people to nature that we really can um, create that understanding how important the web of life is. Yeah, anyways.
Yeah, no, nature in urban contexts, I feel this in, maybe I'm biased, but I feel this from neighborhoods I've lived in that it almost becomes an annoyance,
Yeah.
something that gets in the way. Trees are street trees that are there placed, evenly spaced down, or they've been built around, so their roots are starting to come up through the concrete and are becoming this inconvenience to people. And it's just so sad that we now just see them in cities as so many people just see them as something that gets in the way of parking their car, or something like that. And it's such a shame that we've got a long way to go. But I think you're right. It's there in everyone, that connection to nature. I do believe this is why I feel like it's the best hope we've got in tackling climate change, is nature-based solutions, and bringing nature restoration and conservation, and tackling climate change as a consequence of that, because I feel like people do have that connection within them. It's just tapping back into it. And I really like that story you talk about there in London, of how quickly a neighborhood can feel connected again, feel like it's theirs, and when you said walk into the forest as well, the idea of being able to go out of your house and walk into a forest in London I love that.
Well, actually, in London, we've planted the biggest one also.
Right. Really?
The biggest Miyawaki forest in Europe and the UK is in London. It's in Barking and Dagenham. It's 1 hectare, 30,000 trees. So
Wow.
yeah, that counts. That starts to count. Yeah.
That's so how big, I guess, is it more around the method, or how big can a tiny forest or pocket forest get before it just becomes a normal forest? Is it more around the method of planting? You could potentially do it over quite a few hectares.
Absolutely. And the way that Akira Miyawaki designed it, it was made for large scale. He did tiny ones. I mean, he did some pockets of like 3 square meters in Tokyo, where there's like 9 trees.
Wow.
But it's like a small window into a large forest, right? And that's in the end what we're doing. I mean, it sounds good to call them tiny forests, but in the end, the structure is a structure of an ancient forest. And that is something that really also spoke to me, having lived in cities close to ancient forests, to be able to go in there and to be able to reconnect and rewild is just magic.
So what I really love about what you're doing at SUGi is really looking at the data and tracking that and reporting on it and showing how things are changing. That really helps to tell the story and to back up investment and things like that. I mean, what are some of the perhaps most surprising things that you've found when you've been tracking environmental changes over time? What are some of the kind of headline figures that you've seen in your monitoring of these almost 200 projects that you've got set up now?
Not always everywhere the same and as easy, right? Like, how do you keep track of all these projects? And for us, the first years and still today, are so important to also show. Because think about it, you come with something that is very new in an approach, right? And you want to also show that it doesn't only look good, but that it's also has a certain backing of like data. So with our lead scientist, Gray, in Australia, we really worked on a protocol, and we looked at like, how can we sort of streamline for our forest makers, because we haven't touched upon that, but none of this would be possible without these incredible expert forest makers around the world, right? Like they are an integral part of SUGi, and I mean, for later. But so back to that. So with Gray, we defined a protocol, and what we realized is like, how much can one ask? How much can be done within time? Because everyone today has many other things going on. That's not their full-time job. So we define an easy set, and we know the location, we know the size, we know the number of trees. So the first thing is for us the survival rate. And the astounding thing there is like across the board, if you think of it, look at traditional tree planting, what will it be? Between 20 or 40%?
If that, yeah.
If it all goes, we're at 87% right now across the board on 184 pocket just till the end of the year. I mean, not bad. Like, I mean, the method itself, Akira Miyawaki aimed for like 95%. But, so there are elements that will, depict the survival rate. If you're in a country where there's all of a sudden political upheaval and no one can tend to the forest, yeah, well, then something might happen indeed. So anyway, so the other KPIs are, height of trees. So we measure, average of the 3 highest trees to understand the rate of the growth over time. We now integrated heat maps, which we absolutely love because, one of the big topics in cities is these like heat islands, right? And
Yep.
well, going back to the Pond Street pocket forest, we measured the temperature just next to the forest and outside the forest, like on Pond Street, on the concrete. On the concrete, it was 43 degrees, and next to the forest, 26. Right there, you have 17 degrees difference.
That's
I mean,
crazy. Yeah.
no rocket science needed. But, so our team in Brazil now, they literally just send us, because it's summer there now, so they sent their heat maps on a 1 year and a couple of months pocket forest, 20 degrees difference in and out of the forest. Like, I mean, it's amazing. And we put these maps also on the story pages. Another KPIs that we have is biodiversity observations. We don't use technology right now. We do it really with the eye, and really through visiting the forest and understanding, what returns in the soil. And of course, soil health is one of our key factors, because that really reflects in the trees then as well, and in the growth, logic. So then the other KPIs that we will integrate over time that we're looking at it is like today our cities are concrete on concrete, right? Like if you think of it, the grayifications of our cities. So when it rains really hard, when there's this stormwater, where does it go to? Nowhere. And so through these pocket forests, we create these permeable surfaces. And what we really want to do next now is really measure this kind of like, what is the amount of water that can be retained in a pocket forest? Because it's huge, it really is.
So many potential benefits. Just the temperature aspect alone. I mean, it's already becoming in summer in a lot of cities almost unbearable in terms of the heat, and that alone, just in that one stat, shows the impact of bringing more vegetation into cities, the impact of that.
True. And one can argue, I mean, my God, they're so small. But urban acupuncture. Think about it, 23 now in London. A bird can travel to those 23. They can nest. And before, where would they go? I'm like, as a matter of speed, because they need also this kind of quietness. And that's why, minimum size of 200 square meters is great, because, they could nest inside, and they are sound barriers, these pocket forests.
And I can see so much potential of wasted space, of underutilized space. I mean, have you got any on rooftops yet? Is that possible? They feel like huge. When I look at an aerial map of a city, I'm like, can you imagine if we could create, obviously there's challenges there, but is that something you've looked at?
Yeah, and we've been steering away from that. We've been asked this many times, but our idea is really to create, these ecosystems in the ground.
Yeah.
The closest that we've gone to a rooftop, if you want, London, the South Bank Centre, the iconic brutalist structure. There we've done a phenomenal little intervention, because it was not little. Basically, right where the Hayward Gallery is, we took about 150 square meters, and re-engineered that space with really special soil, like ultra light, ultra fluffy. We're right above a garage. But the way that we engineered the forest is that we didn't design it with all the canopies, because you couldn't have that weight, right? Like, you don't want it to fall through the roof all of a sudden. But so very interesting, the growth is going so well, and the way people already sit next to that green, even though the pocket forest is just like tiny, it's already giving a whole different, feel to that space.
That's so cool. I think, sorry, where was I going with that thought? sorry, 1 second, I've lost my train of thought. Um, it's in so yeah, so much potential, so many different places you could put these forests depending on what you've got in the city. I mean, what are the main barriers you're finding in terms of getting more of these these forests into our cities?
Mm.
You mentioned you work with certain councils. Are there a lot of barriers to overcome in certain council areas or certain countries even when you because it feels like a no-brainer in terms of solution, but I bet it's not until when you have to jump through the hoops of working within such a built-up environment.
No, I mean, look, the councils actually have been incredibly helpful, those three that I
Mm.
said, because they were from the get-go believers in this green infrastructure. And Barking and Dagenham, they literally said, we want to rewild our council. And they were the first to adopt. Newham has been like very pioneering. They just launched their green transition plan.
Hmm.
And in there, it's about decarbonization, biodiversity, and well-being. And literally it touches upon all our aspects. And so they were like, let's do 15 schools together and 3 parks. And we're like, wow, yes. But the thing is, even though they are so pro and want to do this, and we're just talking about London here, right? We can go
Hmm.
into other countries in a second. The challenge remains to find the space, no matter what. Even if you
Hmm.
have people that are such believers and want it, like maybe I can even do a call to action here.
Yeah, please do.
Looking for more sites in London. No, we are actually
Yeah.
looking for really more sites in London, big or small. You see, the thing is like now, and it was rather big news, is that we're going to plant first Miyawaki forest, and really it's a first. You may call it what you want. Tiny, mini, big, whatever. It's a Miyawaki forest in Manhattan.
Oh yeah, I saw this.
And
Amazing. Yeah, so
yeah,
cool.
and that's going to be our number 200. But the thing is that to get to that point, to plant this there, the US, the layers of stakeholders that get involved, it's mind-boggling. One day, I can't remember when, but anyways, I had this conversation like LA, think of it, how big it is, right? How much
Hmm.
space, how easy do you think it would be, to create pockets of forest? Well, it took 18 months for us. And not because, we can't, because we had really great people on the ground and they made it happen in the end. But 18 months to get a 100 square meter school forest done, like it was just because everyone had a say about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we find this all the time in what I work in my day job in terms of habitat restoration projects, and it's obviously it's great that everyone's consulted, and that's right, and in a
Yeah.
way, but it also brings in this level of bureaucracy that can be like make you want to bang your head against the wall sometimes because you get to that point at the end, you're like, why could it feels so obvious, but to have to go through all those loopholes, which are often yeah, overly bureaucratic can be, I can
Um,
imagine, very frustrating.
Totally. But okay, here we are. And, we did what we could, we did what we could over that little time. And, incredible. The first one in Beirut was an absolute feat, for us,
Mm.
for a deep to find that space. I mean, it was a landfill. It's trash we took out of there. And then now it transformed it into a lush forest. Yeah, it's just kind
And I
of,
think with your, which I'm sure you're already seeing this, but I'm sure as you grow and as more and more forests get put in, that'll snowball, and eventually countries will see what other countries are doing, or councils will see what other councils are doing, and be like, we want a piece of that, or especially in this country, you do get a little bit of envy between councils, and one council will see another council doing it. So hopefully that'll lead to more and more councils getting on board and it being less and less difficult. But there's always going to be challenges, I guess, aren't there? And every country has its own different challenges and obstacles to overcome,
it's
I'm sure.
normal, right? It's normal. And we go with what we can do. I mean, of course, I have to say, today with our forest makers and with that community that we have also a running pipeline of projects, meaning,
Mm.
if you, Rob, would tell me, look, I want to support 2 pocket forests right now, I can give you a list of what is available. And you see, that is also the other thing, there is so much more we could do, but it needs funding, certainly.
Yeah. So on that funding point, when you first started out, did you have a clear idea of how you were going to fund these forests, or was it a kind of I'm going to do it and then I'm going to figure out how to fund them after? And how has that progressed over time? How are you finding that at the moment?
Yeah, and for me, really, when the idea for SUGi came, was that idea of like, I want to track my investment and stay
Mm.
connected to it. So I really started with an app.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I used to live in the US. I used to do a lot of Kickstarter, and I love
Yeah.
this idea of like funding or participating in a project and then keeping, staying connected to it. I really
Mm-hmm.
love that. And so I thought, you know what, why does that not exist for trees? I want to see
Mm.
where they're planted and how they're planted. Anyways, we started with an app, and I think I think the time was definitely unfortunate. I mean, it was just around lockdown, and it was the last thing, that would come to mind. But what I also realized is because the model doesn't allow for $1 one tree,
Right.
it's absolutely more, because if you look at the whole process, the funding today for pocket forest also includes the maintenance, the 2 to 3 years reporting. All that takes time and teams, and so I quickly realized that we were not going to go fast like that. And during the lockdown, it allowed me to build a website and to really like launch in September 2020 with this
Mm.
idea of a website with a map and the pins on it, and the story is very visible. And then going out to people and saying, look, the pocket forest is the product.
Yeah.
Would you want to underwrite one? And so slowly but surely, I mean, really, it's a gradual process, right? It took time to get to that number. Yeah.
So looking at private companies and councils and all sorts of different funding streams potentially investing, or is it?
Council's not.
No.
The way that I really wanted to make, I mean, the way that helped us to create a proof of concept, let me put it like that, is
Yeah.
also going back to my past, and that was working with a lot of international brands.
Mm.
So it was through these absolute, wonderful collaborations where these brand partners choose to really invest in nature, build biodiversity and green infrastructure. I really told them, there's no return on investment, there's no carbon, you're going to do this, for the fun, I mean, and for the beauty of it. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
they bring, anyone that they want from their teams or their customers, and it becomes, we were talking about it, right? Like when you're like that shy of nature, it's like, ooh, this is strange. I have never planted a tree. And well, they come and they're all a little bit quiet and all that, but like give it 5 minutes and it's like this wild situation on the mound, on the forest mound. And it's beautiful because it's also through that interaction, and that bonding and the laughter and the joy that goes into the forest. But so yes, that was the way it was actually possible to create this proof of concept. And working with Newham was the first time that a council came to us and said, look, we want to do this.
Right. Okay.
So that was a huge turning point for us. Really the first council.
Amazing. I think this is only going to increase this amount of interest from brands investing in projects like this and companies. I mean, we're seeing a movement away from just it being quite a niche thing that some companies are doing to actually a requirement across the board. We're seeing, I've spoken in previous episodes to people working in this space and around the TNF task force for nature related financial disclosure and things like that are emerging. So companies are having to show how they're impacting on nature and on climate, but then also what they're doing to address that. And I think this gives a real nice way of companies investing in a project that's close to where they're based, can be connecting to staff or even said customers as well, getting involved. It ticks a lot of those boxes while also having huge environmental benefits as well. So I can only see it getting more and more popular, and it's a really powerful story if we can find the places to put them. I guess that's the one of the key challenges.
Exactly, but we can always find places.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Um,
I
so
mean,
yeah,
let's
go
hope.
on.
No, let's hope, yeah.
Yeah, we will. We will. I wanted to go a bit more into that, the idea of the global network and what the power that brings, I guess, of connecting, doing this around the world and sharing ideas and building a community and a network globally. Like, what has that been like? What has that allowed you to do, and what insights have you kind of gained by having a truly global network of these forests?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the forest or the forest makers?
Yeah, well, yeah, so the forest makers are. Tell me about the forest makers, I guess, and what part
Well,
they
let's
play.
start with that because you know
Yeah,
what? It's an integral part of the growth of the
yeah,
pockets, right?
yeah,
And if you think about it, you know, when we started, we started our first pocket forest with Adib, and we had 3 other forest makers signed up to be part
hmm
of non-existing SUGi. I mean, he was bred in Australia. With him,
right,
we really focus on that's not in cities, right? That's rural, but you know, his landscape is extremely fragmented, over farming, and then these farms are left alone now. So what we're doing is creating these corridors for
hmm
endangered species, such as the cassowary bird,
right,
hornbill glider. But it's magic because as we plant these forests there, you literally look onto them, and because it's tropical, it's like in 6 months, it's like this is
yeah,
incredible. He actually already has canopy on his
really,
full
wow,
year forest. Yes, unbelievable.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm jealous.
So
Takes so
yeah,
long over here.
we are very jealous because it would be so great in Europe, right? Like
Mm,
time. And so, you know, Brett and then we had eaten in the US. So there were 3. And today we're 28. And so we do yearly a Rewilder Summit, we call it. It's a
yeah,
summit.
cool.
We look with all our 28 forest makers, and then of course the team, the team that you know works daily on SUGi. We come together and we celebrate, you know, wild nature and what we've built over the past year, but then also we look at cases, you know, we learn
Mm,
from each other. And the last one, I mean, it was really nice because also Adib, you know, he wrote that to me. He's like, this has really is grown up now. Like we're really like a community, and there is this resilience between it. You know,
mm,
there's these, I mean, groups that we have, the WhatsApp groups and all that, and where people really ask first makers, you know, what do you think I should do? You know, this one is not going so well, and that I think is a beauty in itself, that community and that aspect of it. There's so much respect and kindness for each other's work in there, and so we try over the year always do consultancy hours, showcase projects, learn from each other. You know, in Brazil, for example, right now with the Miyawaki forest, we integrated food forests within the schools. And so these are like new things we try, and then we share it with the others. So that's one thing. But also through that community of forest makers, you really create a trust, right?
mm,
Because if you think of it, if you or I need funding, we need to apply, we need to go through processes. You know, it's takes time.
yeah.
It's really like it's intense. It takes calls and all that. With me, it's different. Like they come to me, and basically when we have the funds, we have them and we wire them. And so
Hmm.
this is also the way I wanted to create it, that this was an easy, you know, 360-degree approach to creating that ecosystem restoration. That's something I think is very unique. You know, I trust them.
Mm, yeah.
So yeah, and until this day, you know, the results have been great. But through that and through this like tight knit network, this weaving, we've also been able to really accelerate in certain cities, certainly London, but also in Beirut. You know, if you look at South Africa with Ahmed, with Limby, like with each forest maker, we try to really grow that portfolio in their or the footprint, if you want, in their city. And last year, for example, I said, okay, no fellowship, because, every year we launch a fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
It allows us to train new forest makers and then grow our community. But I said, also like SUGi was going through so much growth, and it's like, okay, wait, let's really like deepen the bond with the existing forest makers. Let's grow that. And so this year we're ready again. Tomorrow we're launching our fellowship.
Amazing.
You can buy if you want.
Oh yeah. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about the fellowship then. What's involved in that?
Very easy. It's just for us a way also for people to allow to join that community.
Mm-hmm.
We often get a request from people to become a SUGi rewilder, and
Right.
it's not such an straightforward thing, because there is that process of like onboarding, of creating that trust, of seeing what you do, what have you done, what are the results. Because again, when you, Rob, as a brand partner, invest with SUGi, you want to see the results. So that is a very important thing, to create that relationship with the fellows, and that's why we do the fellowship. So anyone can apply anywhere. We pick 5 people. We close it end of April, just after Earth Day, and by the summer, they will be trained by our expert forest makers, and then they will create their test plot. We call it. That's why it's a fellowship, and the ones that we really feel that create a really fun relationship. That's how we have Michael in Kenya, Ahmad in South Africa. They all come through the fellowship. Maya also in Boston, with Chicago, so Christine, Paul in Germany. They all come through the
Amazing. So it really is about the people and
It's
connecting
about the
those people. Yeah, and I'm learning. I didn't realize that was how it was structured, and you had these these forest makers were such an integral part of it, and that's really a really cool model and nice way to do it. I mean, in terms of the way without getting too much into the weeds, as it were, but like in terms of the way, is there an ongoing payment? Is it a kind of a one payment at the start to kind of get it going? Do you just provide the tools? Like, how does that work with the forest makers if someone's interested in joining?
Yeah, and so for us, really, like, let's say interested in joining is the fellowship, right? There we provide the training, and we help them to create their first pocket forest.
Yeah.
Once they're a SUGi forest maker, they have to be self-sustaining in the sense that they're not paid like a monthly fee. Everyone has a job, a day job, or has already another company doing permaculture or something else. The creation of Miyawaki Forest becomes a sort of a side.
Right. Yeah.
But they're in there for the right reasons. They have the passion. They are feeling motivated. And then what I do, as soon as I see that there's like a potential brand partner, or that there's funding available, that's how we work today, right? It's like, okay, guys in Chile, let's do this. Let's plant. Oh, we have the funding. Okay, so then they get funding for that pocket forest, and that becomes SUGi pocket forest. Because the other day we were on our summit, and with these 28 forest makers, some I have never spoken to. Well, that's also not true. I have a very tight relationship with all of them, but still, you don't speak to them every day, right? And so I asked them to just say their name, also because not everyone, there are a lot of new ones, and how many pocket forests they have already planted in their cities. Well, Nicholas in Belgium is like at 90 or something. And the team, Magdalena in Chile, is like at 40. So you see, so it's like, but what we love doing with SUGi, and that, again, comes out of my background, is that is really what I've been doing in the past, is really creating this umbrella where that community can thrive together, but they can also work separately, where we create a window. Because, for example, Ethan, the healing forest, right? When we planted it, right then we were part of the winners of Uplink. There was a second cohort, is 2020. And the team of Uplink loved so much the healing forest. They made a blog about it. They made a video about it. BBC came to film it, BBC Earth. And you see, this is like, it was great visibility for Ethan.
Yeah.
Same happened with Limbe in Cameroon, and same happened, with the team in India. And it's also why we do this, is
Hmm.
that telling the story of the forest, and really creating that content. You might have seen on our YouTube, like over 20 or 30 videos, I don't know, created
It's
in all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, that's the next thing I wanted to maybe talk about a little bit more was the creation of the brand and the way this is something I'm fascinated about because of your background and what you bring as a from your background in brand and that side of things and what you then bring to being a founder and entrepreneur. Would love to get your insights on that, how you're thinking about SUGi in terms of a brand and a kind of and a modern brand as well. You talk about the media side of things and the potential of that. How much are you bringing that thinking across with you when you're thinking about building a new company and a new brand here? And what do you think other, because that's one of the main focuses of this podcast is talking to people who might be interested in starting a company or becoming an ecopreneur. What are some of the things that maybe we could founders who are coming from more of an ecology or a environmental background could learn from?
I think, first of all, for me, I don't know how you feel about it, Rob, but thank God I was a bit naive. Meaning,
Mm,
when you know too much what's about to come to you, I mean, that is really like that would have not worked, in the sense
yeah.
that you wake up very often to swim against the tide,
Mm,
and definitely back in 2019, when I said this is about biodiversity, people were like, wow, wait, what? Like, where's the carbon calculator? And I'm like, like, but so, and I
yeah.
think the other thing that was very, very key for me, and that leads into that brand building, is that stick to your vision,
Mm,
because it's fantastic, right? And many people want to give many opinions and advice and support and whatnot. And, I've been told many times that I'm very stubborn. Um, it might be true, but it is probably true. But the thing is that with this, in this case, one has to be,
yeah.
because, how many did you see around COVID that shifted their, you
Hmm.
know, focus?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I don't hear about them anymore. Like, and so I think this is really, I mean, for me, two keys is like, just start
Hmm.
and stay focused massively.
Yeah.
And then three, when around the brand, it's it's also an extreme focus, in the sense that we've decided from day one, and it was very important for me, is to celebrate the beauty of nature, is to create a place of hope. But then it's not an easy fact to stick to that, because
Mm,
there's a lot of negative in the
yeah.
in happening around. But that is also where you create that red line, right? It's the red line through the way you speak about it, the way you show your visuals, the way you align the brand with what you are and
Hmm.
what the values you want to reflect. And then you just multiply that across all the social media platforms, which is like, for us also like, oh my God, like and that's also like, we just stick to three things right now,
Hmm.
like Instagram, LinkedIn, and our email, or a SUGi email. That's it. Because you can't really, it's otherwise, if you're such a tiny team, it's extremely demanding.
Mm. I mean, I think you're doing a really good job, but it feels like it's a strong brand, a strong message, and you can see it's something that people can galvanize around, I guess. And with it being a positive, you're right, there's so much negativity out there, and what restoration and planting trees and forests does is it tells a really positive story that people can get behind. And yeah,
Mm.
I love that.
Thank you.
Well, conscious of time, and I've got a few kind of questions that I like to ask all my guests, which I'd like to get onto. Just double checking, is there anything else kind of around SUGi that you really wanted to cover that we haven't touched on yet, or any other topics that we've skipped
No,
over?
just for anyone, if they want to remember SUGi, 3 words: biodiversity, climate resilience, and well-being. And that's SUGi.
Amazing.
Thank you.
So in terms of the 3 questions that I've been asking all my guests, which I hope you have potentially some answers to. The first one is with this ecopreneurship message in mind and trying to spread the ideas around as much as possible. And most people I've spoken to on the podcast already tend to have a common trait, which is have lots of ideas for things, but obviously don't have the time to start hundreds of different businesses. So I've been asking to get ideas out there and to spread the love a bit. Do you have any business ideas that you've had in the past in this space that you would love to start if you had more time, or something that you'd be happy to share with people listening?
Right. I'm not sure this is the ecopreneur space, as you call it. For me, it's really in the entrepreneur space.
Hmm.
And it links to, I'm sorry, your question later. The thing is that right now, if you look at a company, right, for example, SUGi, going from year 3, and this is very much known, to year 4, it's a transition. The typical like creative entrepreneur has to become manager, and in that transition, there is such a gray space, like phenomenal. Like I can tell you. So right now, going through it, I realize there are so many gaps in the market and things that I already tell myself, if I ever, whatever phase comes after SUGi, I would want to provide support right in that phase. It's the
Right.
trickiest phase, is the phase where you're about to like want to give up because you're too small to have already, the funding to have like a really solid team. But you need that team, but you're not big enough yet, and so you have this great gap, and you really need support of people that have gone through this, or that can connect you to someone, and in that phase can really be some sort of relief. Also, like in this case, I'm a sole founder, and so all the questions and the directions have to come from you, and sometimes you're only human, right? Like you doubt things, and it's like, and then I started to think recently, like, it was really interesting because remember when Oliver also made that post of all these things that he was looking for, and it's really true. It's like we spoke about that, and it's like it would be fantastic if there was a platform where I just go to and say, look, I would right now need this kind of person that has gone through this, and and that understands the complexity, because it's very easy for someone to say, yeah, but you have to do this and that and that. It is not so easy to put that really into action if you're doing 5 jobs, really.
Yeah. And I think I guess is why so many people end up going out and getting funding, because that funding often comes with that support and it takes that to that next level. It's, I guess, yeah, as you say, really difficult to get to that next level of business when you're running around and doing everything
That's
yourself. And
exactly
then,
right.
yeah,
And raising funds is a job in itself.
exactly.
And now
Yeah.
it's like, no, I can't do that. So you see, but it's fine, but it's interesting because there is an opportunity there. I ran into someone also top innovator in Uplink, and when you read about her, it's like, wow, it's a success. But we're going through the same exact thing. It's like too much to carry, but not yeah. Anyways, so
Yeah. Oh, I've been there in terms of I've worked at startups before that have got to that point, and you need to hire people to take you to that next level. But when you hire them, it brings in this whole level of admin, and then you've got another person, and they do transform the business, but then it brings in a whole other load of challenges. And yeah, I've seen it happen, and it's a tricky thing to
I would
navigate.
love to imagine such a transition company, people that really like are there to support you, like literally support,
Love
um
it. Oh, I love that idea. That's someone should definitely do that because I've heard that before from several people at a similar stage. It's a key challenge that needs help with, I think. So yeah. The next question I've got is around books, book recommendations. I was wondering if there's anything that you've read recently or that you've read in the past that you would love to share with listeners. It can be in the environmental space or the entrepreneurial space, or it could tackle both, whatever, or one from each, whatever you want.
How about spy novels? I love them.
Yeah, I mean, it could
Yeah.
be a spy novel.
Actually, really, because they distract me. But, in this case, sometimes it's several books, that I pick up and change. Of course, there's always these incredible nature stories, like recently one about Nordic mythology, beautiful little stories, very relaxing. But the thing that really like got me right now, because it links to the question that you just asked before, is a book called The Messy Medal. And The Messy Middle from Scott Belsky is phenomenal. And it's really this book that helped me through that phase. Like the way he speaks about, that messy middle,
Mm,
the ups and the downs and the things you're juggling, and then about grit and endurance. And it really got me. Like I thought, wow, try to reach out. I thought, you might be like the solution to that, to the phase, but it's really interesting. It's magically written for somebody that really goes through this now.
amazing. I'll put a note to that in the show notes. And the final question is the billboard question, which is if you could put a quote on a billboard, it can be a quote of your own, it can be a quote from, you can steal a famous quote from anyone as long as you attribute it, to go in your city where you live to get a message out to as many people as possible, shouting as loud as we can. I'm going to fund these all one day, hopefully. What would it be?
I'll take your word on it. If it's a billboard, I would want it to be short. And
Yeah.
so I've said it before, it's just start,
Mm,
because many people talk about it, but we need action. So just
yeah.
start.
Yeah.
And there's a longer phrase, that I always keep in mind, but for the billboard, I would use that.
I love that. Just start. It's you're so right. There's a lot of ideas out there, a lot of nervousness to get going, and it's never going to be easy. There's always going to be challenges, so you've just got to
There's
start.
no such thing as failing. I mean,
That would also be a good
mm.
quote. There's no such thing as failing. I like that. You can have
But
two.
there's another one. I tell you this, and I know this is probably off podcast, but are you familiar with Satish Kumar?
The name rings a bell, but
He's this, I
yeah.
mean, incredible figure. I mean, walked in the
Mm.
60s from Delhi to
Ah, yeah,
Washington
yeah,
over
yeah.
2 years, like really. And, I got to spend some time with him, and
Wow.
yeah, it was like a 3-day regenerative agricultural workshop. And at that time, I felt very overwhelmed. I'm like, what am I even doing? Planting all these pocket forests, like, and this is all the just start, right? Like,
Mm.
it's like, what does it even do? And you know what he said, and that's not for a billboard, but that is really definitely one for all of us, is that he said, think of yourself as a radiator. One radiator warms one room, another radiator warms another room, and a house has many radiators. So just keep doing what you're doing, but do it with your whole heart. Do it,
Mm.
really authentically, but just do it. And I thought, wow, yeah, you know what? Indeed, we get so overwhelmed by all these, like the noise and the messages. But if you think of yourself like, let's do this, like really focused in one room, like,
Yeah,
and
if you try and imagine the whole house or whatever it might be, then it becomes overwhelming. You've got to think of
overwhelming.
yourself as, and that's the problem with so much today, isn't it? Everything feels overwhelming and challenges feel huge. And
Absolutely.
but if we all chip away at it together, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Elise, for taking the time to chat to me today. Really enjoyed it. Love what you're doing at SUGi and can't wait to see where it goes from here.
Thank you so much, Rob, for having me.